Thank you, Jim. As Jim said, my name is Emily Cook. I serve as General Counsel and Director of Patient Advocacy at Texas Right to Life. We have several offices, but I work out of our Houston office. And as many of you've heard of Texas Right to Life. We engage in the abortion debate, but one of the other areas that we are very active in is the other side of the spectrum, stopping euthanasia, involuntary active euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide, these other life issues that are really permeating throughout our communities, permeating throughout our medical schools, society, and a very devaluation of life that we see in the womb being transposed to the devaluation of life of people who are sick, people who are elderly, people who may have a disability, living with a disability. And so we're going to go into some of a policy tonight that is called the Texas's 10-day rule. Now in Texas, there are two ways that you're a patient in an ICU that a hospital or a physician can remove life-sustaining treatment over the objections of your spouse, your surrogate, your medical power of attorney. These two ways are brain death diagnosis and the 10-day rule. And I make this distinction so that we understand the framework of what we're talking about. Brain death diagnosis is a completely different can of worms. It's a different statute, has its own terrible problems. But what we're talking about tonight is specifically the 10-day rule. So everything, any patients that are having the 10-day rule invoked on them, they are not, there is no brain disability, there's no brain death diagnosis, and I just want to make that clear. It's a common misconception for folks. So we're going to go straight into meeting some of these patients that Texas Right to Life has helped in the past. This is Carolyn Jones. In 2019, she suffered a stroke and was in a hospital. Before she was a stroke victim, she had regular outpatient dialysis, okay? And she would go twice a week for dialysis treatment. Well, her family, in the hospital and a physician decided they no longer wanted to treat her and that she was no longer worth living. She was competent, she was awake, she could track you, she could make certain movements and follow commands, but they wanted to remove her life-sustaining treatment. So pursuant to the Texas 10-day law, the hospital removed her ventilator. One of the fascinating parts of her story is they removed her ventilator. Her family was around the bedside. Her nieces had come in, her sisters, her husband, her daughter, begging these nurses who were removing the IV lines and removing the ventilator, please don't do this, please don't do this, please don't do this. And they removed the ventilator. Well, sometimes, patients can have died within minutes or they can pass away or not. And in Carolyn's case, she did not. She, hour by hour, kept going. She was breathing on her own. She was the day turned into night, and the next day was Tuesday, and she was still alive and conscious. Tuesdays were her regularly scheduled dialysis days, but since the hospital could not kill her by removing her ventilator because she lived through that, they refused to provide her dialysis because under the law, dialysis is considered life-sustaining treatment. So we're sitting there begging for the hospital to provide dialysis treatment because now she won't die from premature removal of life-sustaining ventilator, but she's going to die from kidney failure. And so long story short, by Wednesday night, we were able to arrange to have her discharged against medical advice. We hired a private ambulance service to take her around the corner to an ER so that she could be stabilized, which only meant a dialysis treatment. And she lived for the next 9-10 months until she passed away naturally without needing any other interventions. Whoops. Let's see, how do we do this? This is her. That is the video. We'll get a clip.
Wasn't able to move like she was previously in rehab. She wasn't mobile at that point, but she was responsive. She was aware of her surroundings. She can respond to pain. She can follow you from one side of the room to the next. She could blink. She could respond through blinking. She was coherent, but because my mom did not recover fast enough to their liking, they chose to enforce the 10-day rule.
Another patient is Jose Portillo. He was working in Amarillo and caught COVID, and he ended up in an ICU setting. And about 2-3 weeks into his illness, the hospital started the 10-day rule on him. He was alone here. He had just come on a work visa for a construction company, and his insurance hadn't kicked in yet because he was still in the probationary period. His employer went to great lengths to get that fixed for them, but the hospital didn't have family around, and so they decided to start the 10 days. His brother contacted Texas Rights Life, and through, we were able to negotiate with hospital attorneys to get him transferred to a hospital back in Mexico. He ended up having to stay in the hospital for 5 months before he got better. However, I have one more, Jim, I'm sorry. This is the result.
Milagros, 5 meses y 3 semanas de hospitalización en Amarillo, Texas.
He was able to, after a lengthy hospital stay, walk, talk, record a video. If his ventilator had been removed 2 weeks after he showed up at the hospital, he would have been dead. Virginia Manning was a retired school teacher at the end of 2021. The hospital in Denison removed life-sustaining treatment from her pursuant to the 10-day law. We were not able to stop that one, to stop that from happening, and her husband stayed with her as she gasped for air for 23 hours before dying. If you've known anything about this topic, then it's probably been because of the Tinsley Lewis case in Tarrant County. And this is Tinsley when she was 2019, when she was about 9 months old in 2019, and we caught this case on day 9 of the 10-day countdown, and it's a miraculous story in itself. But a TRO was able to be attained on a Sunday, and her life was spared. She is now 3 years old and discharged home finally after a very lengthy. One of the issues that we find in these cases is not providing a trach. You're supposed to, if you're going to need long-term mechanical ventilation support, that is after 14 days. That's what long-term means. Then a trach, because you cannot move anywhere else out of an ICU setting without having that trach. They denied this little girl a trach for over 1.5 years. Finally, we were able to convince them to give her a trach, and so that enabled her to move out of ICU to a transitional care unit and back home. I was able to visit her just a couple months ago in her home with her family in Tarrant County. Again, these are all situations where their mother, the surrogate decision maker, the spouse, had a difference of opinion. Lucy was a devout Catholic woman, and she had many conversations with her children about what kind of care that she wanted and did not want. And her mother, her daughter was very adamant that her mom would never want to, she wanted to be given a chance at life. And so we were able to, again, a trach was an issue with Lucy, and we were able to finally get that resolved, stop the 10-day countdown, get the trach resolved, and then have her transferred to a different facility where they could help provide care for her until she passed away naturally. We'll keep going. So how does this happen? We are in the patient, the family wants life-sustaining treatment to be continued, and this is treatment that's already being provided. It's not extraordinary, and it's working. So like in Carolyn's case, the dialysis treatment was working. It was helping filter her kidneys. Ventilator support is helping bring oxygen into your body's doing the rest, but helping bring oxygen into that first step. And that the treatment's working as intended. It's not a treatment that has no bearing on whatever ailment you're trying to cure. But the attending physician wants to withdraw that life-sustaining treatment. So a process gets kicked off. The physician who wants to remove goes and asks for an ethics consult. It's not really a consult because the decision after the ethics committee is binding. It's required and request an ethics consult. This committee review process is started. 48 hours notice is given to the surrogate, to the family, to say, we're having this meeting, you can come if you would like, and then they convene to hear the physician's case. Inside the committee, my experience, you can have anywhere from 12 to 16 people that are affiliated with the hospital. They work there. You'll have the chaplain, you'll have a social worker, you'll have a nurse, you'll have a different physician from a different discipline. They're all colleagues, and the physician will present their side, the family can present their side. Sometimes the family, the physician, the family is not allowed to be in the room when the physician presents their side. It's one of the things that we argue about a lot. And then the family and physician are dismissed for the committee to deliberate and make a decision. I've been in multiple ethics committee meetings where before the meetings ever started, someone's walking in with a piece of paper that already has that written decision that we're supposed to be there to deliberate about, okay? And, so that I can catch them doing that, and I can get, you know, like, we can fix that, and the time can start over about that, but how many times does that happen when they don't have a lawyer present? The decision is given to the family, and if the committee grants the physician's request to remove life-sustaining treatment over the objections of the surrogate, the decision is binding. It is not a recommendation. They try to, we battle this in court. They'll say, well, it's a recommendation. No, if it was a recommendation, that's fine. We can recommend, take advice all day long. That's excellent information. But it's transferring that power of who makes that decision from the family, from the surrogate, based on quality of life decisions. You know what your spouse would want. You know what is valuable to your family. To have a room full of strangers decide, yeah, it doesn't really matter that, you know, grandma wants to see great-grandchild be born. Doesn't really, that we don't think that her life is worth living. My very first case, she was about 26 years old, and we're in the ethics committee meeting, and she had MS. At the time, they thought she was the MS. It ended up being Lyme disease later on, but they wanted to remove her ventilator. I noticed on the medical notes that it was within, she was within the weanable stages, and I said, why are we here to prematurely remove ventilator support instead of weaning her off? And the doctor said, well, who wants to live with MS?
What?
Well, hello. Oh, that is so not for you. That is for her mother and her stepdad who are here, okay? And so those are the real life implications of what happens in the 10-day rule. We'll keep going. So there's two paths to end. One is our state legislators, with the stroke of a pen, can eliminate a couple sentences that keeps this whole dispute resolution process in place, and all they can do is just eliminate the 10-day countdown. What we have found is the countdown incentivizes a denial of care, a decrease in care, because they know, what's the point? We're gonna pull the plug in 7-8 days, and there's no sense in me treating this bed sore. There's no sense trying to provide normal care that would be experienced. And then the second, because we have not been just knocking your head against the door with number one, you all know how frustrating it is to work with the legislature. Number two, we have started litigating and suing people. So, there we go. Thank you.
I have a question for Emily. On the 10-day rule, if we eliminate that, how do we make sure that we don't have like somebody just wants to keep mom alive forever on the government, Medicaid dollar? How do we fix the rule in a way that that's not going to be a problem there?
That's a question that's often raised. So one, no one lives forever. So there's, even when we talk about natural death, people pass away with the provision of life-sustaining treatment. So if you are on a ventilator, you can die on a ventilator.
Yes,
because
you
it's
can.
not doing all the breathing. It's part of the breathing, helping you put oxygen in your body. If the rest of your organs fail, and you're in multi-organ system failure, you're going to pass away whether you're on a ventilator or not. The second point to that is there are 11 other states. So first of all, Texas is the only state in the nation that has this rule. You cannot do this in any other state. I had a case a few months ago. The man was from Wichita Falls, but the closest hospital to his nursing home was in Texarkana, and by law, emergency's got to go to the nearest hospital. So they started the 10-day process on him here in Texas, whereas if he had just went to Oklahoma, an Oklahoma hospital, they would not. Oklahoma has a law that says you cannot remove life-sustaining treatment over objections based on disability, age, or handicap. And so the other states, like, they don't have this problem, right? They don't have a problem of they're in New York, they're not running out of money to pay for health care. In other states where this law is not in place, this is not reality. It doesn't happen. What we have found is when the countdown is removed, there is a motivation to find an alternate care facility to perform something like a trach, to allow them to go home to, or be placed in a long-term care facility. Another, a lot of this, the Wichita Falls family, that ended up being just a dispute about hospice care, because they did not want to, the family was okay removing the ventilator from the patient, but not food and water. And that is, we had to go into this negotiation with the hospital of, they just don't want to starve and dehydrate their father to death. And it's not really so outlandish to do, but you're gonna utilize the 10-day rule to remove, food, water, and ventilator support. And so bringing this together. So that's, people think that is what the result would be, is that someone's going to live forever and there's gonna be so much money used. In practical terms, it doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. And we don't see that in other states either. The flip side of that is, we gotta get back to the principle of why, whose job is it to make those decisions? Is it the families of the smallest unit possible to make those decisions? Or is it people we don't know in a boardroom deciding your life is more valuable than his life, and you get to live and you don't? Yes, sir.
So what was the incentive for the legislature to pass this rule at the beginning? If we're the only ones that got it, what sold it to them?
I love this question. So it was passed in 1999. The pro-life community had a little bit of a presence in the Capitol, but part-time lobbying, not a full-fledged aspect, and it snuck in. So it was actually heralded as an entryway, a doorway into physician-assisted suicide. What we see with euthanasia is all around us. It's just called different things. Yeah. And it's a slow introduction to get people accustomed to removing that decision-making power away from you, to accustom us to thinking that there are people whose lives are more valuable than the others, and that we're not all equal simply because we're all human. And so that it was meant to be the framework and to be a model for the rest of the country. The physician-assisted suicide people came in. It snuck in because of the medical lobby, Texas Medical Association. It actually passed both chambers, but we did have enough, I say we, I was like 10 years old, so not me, but predecessors, convinced Governor Bush to veto it. So the original version was vetoed by the governor because it had no dates at all, period. And then it was just, the medical lobby in the intervening 2 years was just so persuasive that they said, fine, we'll give you 10 days. And we quickly found that, because we started getting calls from families, and that this was happening, and they assured us this would only happen in extraordinary circumstances. And food and water used to be part of this until 2015, and we were able to get an exception made out to where food and water could not be withheld. This is what was happening, starving and dehydrating patients to death. Food and water could not be withheld unless it was physiologically ineffective, meaning your body can't process food and water. That would be physiologically inappropriate to do. Not this quality of life is, I think you need to go on to glory. We had a nurse say that one time. I was just like, you need to bring your doctor, it's time for your mom to go on to glory. Okay, we'll let Jesus take her. Okay, thank you.
Could I follow up on that? Was there, it seems implausible to me that there was not some kind of financial incentive waved in front of the legislators to get them to go for this. I wondered, was the Medicaid argument not there at all?
So as far as political, the Texas Medical Association, they pump hundreds of thousands of dollars into state legislative races every year. What stopped it, what stopped it from going far and wide, and why Texas remains the only one, is in the early 2000s, remember that was the Terry Schiavo case out in Florida. Yes. And that brought nationwide attention, so it stopped that momentum, and that's why it didn't take traction into other states, but here, we're really embedded in our delivery of healthcare here in Texas. How is it sold? You have people who come to the Capitol and they give these stories of what we call bad faith surrogates, okay? So kind of like Jim, towards your saying is, what if I have, I just want my mom's social security check, so I won't consent to removal of life support because I just want her to keep living no matter what. Okay, we already have tools to it. That's called bad faith surrogates. We already have tools. If anyone, even a healthcare provider, and I've had this happen before, where they will initiate guardianship proceedings for a patient because they believe that the surrogate is not acting in the best interest. That is a court process that goes on that attorneys are appointed and you get to get into those issues. That's the answer, whereas this quasi-judicial process that no one has any rights to is in law and allowed to occur. And so they're met with sob stories that aren't actually what we're talking about. There's answers
Kind of
already
like a
in law
10-year-old girl that's
process.
raped.
I'm sorry?
It's kind of like the 10-year-old girl that's raped. It's kind of a false stories.
And that's what we try to do, is we try to go and we recruit witnesses for the Capitol and during committee hearings and educational events like this to change the narrative that the legislators hear, that they hear every session because of that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank y'all for having us.
Thanks for coming. Next month, we'll be back here, second Thursday at 6:30, which would be August 11th. And our topic will be, we're gonna watch the movie, What is a Woman?
Oh, wow.
And apparently, there's a large segment of our population who is confused about what an XX chromosome does. So we're gonna watch Ben Shapiro's movie, What is a Woman? And, invite some liberal friends. Let them learn what a woman is. They
Yeah.
seem confused right now. So we'll see y'all then.